is the other co-chair to the public. I want to thank everyone, especially I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Clinton Health Department, Clinton County, NYDC, Dr. Major from the Center of Health Promotion, Shipping, Gary Gunther from DEC, and of course Cynthia for accommodating this meeting. We have an agenda for tonight. Our main person here that will be presenting the results from anything that has happened since the last meeting is Mr. Stephen Blar. He has been involved with this project more than I have, probably more than a lot of people here. And I'd like to emphasize that I'd like to keep a format. We have a presentation. We have invited Dr. Major here. He has a nice presentation also. Stephen has given everybody copies of the slides. If you can write down any comments you have, any questions. I'd like to leave the questions till the end and let them do their presentation. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, and I will be here as long as you need me to answer your questions. Oh, and I forgot, my technical manager, Carol's correct. She's also from the Corps of Engineers, and our chemist, Marie Royces. So, the meeting begins. Well, we want to talk about the meeting minutes. They were mailed to everyone in the mailing list. If someone here wants to be in our mailing list, please, we have a sign-in list. If you're not on our mailing list, we'll gladly send you the minutes and the agenda for the next meeting. Otherwise, anybody on the board or anybody have any comments regarding the meeting minutes from the previous meeting?
There was one comment on the page 7, the top, it's the Press Republican, not Press Republic.
Oh, I made a boo-boo. The person that's going to be orchestrating this meeting, once I stop talking, will be this Joan Becker. She's a public relations contractor from Weston, and she will be handling the questions and answers at the end of the meeting. Go ahead.
Are there any other, I'm Joan Becker, and I do community relations for Weston, and I did follow the project from the beginning. Just any other comments to the minutes, please? Okay, well, those who you don't normally get, I see some new faces, and if you haven't gotten these, you want to take a look at them. There's a number on the newsletter you can call and make changes to, make comments about. I'd just like to take a minute, because we have some new faces here. I guess there's a couple of things. One, I think we should go around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm sorry about this. Somebody's squeaking a little. We are recording the meeting. We do that every time. That's how we get the minutes. So, we keep the tapes. When we first started these meetings, we talked about sort of how the format of the meetings are run. And around the table, you have members of the Corps and the regulators and members of the lab that have been with us more or less from the beginning of the process. How we run these meetings are we give everybody an opportunity to talk and state what they want to state, and then we give other people an opportunity to comment on that. Tonight we're going to go through a presentation because we have 9 monitoring wells out there, and no one here has heard the results of the 9 monitoring wells that run from the Atlas to the town. Okay, these monitoring wells, which Steve will show you, were positioned down the hill towards the town, and they're going to talk about the results of these. And we have asked Dr. Major to come and talk about risk and risk assessment, and he is here this evening. And we will have a question and answer period at the end of this. As Lou stated, we'd like you to just jot down your questions, and hopefully we can move through the presentation rather rapidly and get to people's questions and answers, because I know this is very important to everybody here. If I could just ask everybody just very quickly to introduce themselves, if they're regulators, to say who they are, and then we'll move into the presentation. I think that's all. Just a couple of things. We have newsletters. We also have the handouts of this presentation, which if you haven't gotten, you should grab, and Steve has them up there. We have the last month's minutes, or the last meeting's minutes. There are extra copies of the January newsletter out front, and we have the newsletter for this particular meeting. Okay? All right. With that, again, I'm Joe Becker. I work for Weston. I'm the contractor on this job and several others with water issues. You want to start up there, Cynthia?
Cynthia Rowe, co-chairman of the Restoration Advisory Board and a resident of Ellenburg Depot.
My name is Gary Gunther. I'm a DEC employee assigned to environmental facilities, and I work with communities to help them install community infrastructure, generally wastewater systems.
Lou Stanlabato, the project manager from New York District for the Corps of Engineers.
I'm Russ Mulvey, I'm with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm the project manager in charge of the Atlas S11 hazardous waste site. Working with Lou's and with the State Health Department as well.
I'm Nick Major. I'm with the Department of Preventive Medicine organization.
Carol Charette from the New England District Army Corps of Engineers and the chief of the environmental engineering section, and we provide the engineering technical support to the New York District, which Lou's is the project manager.
I'm Marie Wojcicki, chemist at the New York District Corps of Engineers.
I'm Loris, I'm just a resident.
At Bulverson, I'm the depot, and I'm a member of the RAD.
Gerald Beach, member of the Red Ellenburg.
Paula Crockers, the acting director of public health for the County Department.
Jim Kay, Director of Environmental Health for the County Health Department.
Kurt Degas, resident here in Ellenburg Depot.
Steve Bloor, I'm the project manager at Weston. If you have any questions after the meeting, feel free to grab them. Back to the room.
Calvin Cheeseman, resident of Ellenburg Depot.
I'm Linda Chancellor, resident. Both resident. Judy Denver, resident.
Craig Miller, resident. George Sigmund, resident. Mark Stevens, Helen Nelson.
And I live on the other side of the space.
Ann Landry, I'm a resident.
Ed Landry, President.
Okay, why don't we let Steve take it away with this presentation?
Did we vote to finalize the minutes?
No, he didn't.
Can I have a motion?
Make a motion to finalize the meeting.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed?
Just before we move on the agenda, you see previous action items. There were two action items from the last meeting. One of them was for the Corps to identify someone to come talk about TCE and the risks associated with TCE. That's why Dr. May is here. The second action item was associated with public health issues. Towards the end of the presentation, there'll be more information on that. Maybe it can be supplemented by the people from the health department. Once again, my name is Steve Bloor. Feel free to see me after this if I don't answer all your questions fully. I'm going to be talking about the core investigation, the past core investigation, the monitoring well results, and an overview of human and ecological risk assessments. Can everyone see the slides? On the way, you know? I can move a little further. The dirt FUDS process, we're going to turn to the core and we'll give a brief discussion of where we are in the dirt FUDS process and where we're going. And then Dr. Major will give a presentation. Okay. For those of you, I didn't define dirt FUDS, but for those of you who don't know all these acronyms, Defense Environmental Restoration Program, we formerly use defense sites. That's dirt FUDS. Okay. Let me get the lights. Everyone see that? There's the Atlas site, Atlas S11. There's Route 11. The Shazy comes in, does that loop right there, it comes across, goes up that way. There's the rail line. Just to get you situated. This is north, going up this way. Okay. The last RAB meeting, I went through about 100 slides that went over all of these investigations, what we've done to date. So if you have questions afterwards on any of the specific investigations we've done, I can go over those. You have a copy of the previous presentation attached to your meeting minutes. A summary of this past and where we started is over on this poster board, if you want to take a look at it after the meeting. It doesn't go into these investigations, though. In 1987, Law Environmental and TWM were brought to identify and to sort of trace back where this TCE was coming from that was identified in the homeowner wells. I guess the Health Department and DEC were looking into petroleum spills in the area, and they kept coming up with TCE in the wells, which they couldn't identify a source. So through these two investigations, it was sort of pointed back up the hill to the former Atlas missile site. Weston came into the picture in 1998 and started sampling the homeowner wells. We sampled a little over 60 wells, 4 quarters, December of 98, September 98, and then every quarter around for a year. Approximately half the wells during each round came back with TCE. So if we sampled 60 wells, 30 of them came back with TCE. So we took about 247 samples in total. All of them were below MCL for TCE. We did pick up some petroleum products above the standards, and we let the DEC know about those when they came up. In the summer of '99, we started a geophysical investigation at the site. We did 3 different techniques. We looked below the surface by dragging equipment across the surface. We looked for subsurface metallic anomalies, buried fence, pipe, underground storage tanks, drums. Based upon that geophysical investigation, we did a test pit investigation down here, but I'll go sequentially. We also did a soil gas investigation that identified a couple hot spots on site that we thought may be potential source areas of TCE. We did a fracture trace analysis to look at groundwater flow from the site down to the town. We sampled the missile silo, found very low concentrations of TCE that looked like a source area. We then did a test pit investigation to look at the anomalies we found during the geophysical investigation and the 2 spots during the soil gas investigation. The test pit investigation, we excavated 20 pits down to rock, came up with rebar, fence. We had 1 drum lid. We found a former location where there was an underground storage tank. We took soil samples, and we got some results that were above standard, but nothing pointed towards TCE. We got some compounds you would see in asphalt type material. We also found a few metals that were over guidelines. We looked at some trenches east of the site. One of the residents noticed that there were trenches in his field. We took a look at those. We couldn't tie them back to the site in any way, shape, or form. We conducted interviews with local residents, past employees of the site, to determine if they could point us towards any area where there could be disposal drums or any material. Nothing came out of that. They told us that the military used solvents during their operations there, but they couldn't point to any disposal practices that would lead us to a specific area in the site. And then last, we've been doing a monitoring well investigation that I'm going to discuss this evening, what the results of that investigation are. Once again, here's the site, Route 11, Bull Run Road. We installed MW1 on the site. That was the first well we installed. Then we installed MW2 down here. Based upon those two wells, the information we got from those wells, as well as a bunch of different investigations that we conducted, we installed the rest of the well arrays to try to get the extent, nature and extent of the TCE in the groundwater. You'll see MW1106. That was a well previously installed on the site. There were 6 wells installed on the site. They're very shallow. Our wells run 100, 200 feet deep. The wells that were previously installed were about 20 feet deep, 25 feet deep. Most of them are dry. This was the only well that had water on it, so we took a sample out of it. For those of you at the last meeting, this is a repeat. You've seen it before. That's a water level indicator, tells us how deep the water is in the well. This is the electronics that go down to the pump. Everyone knows the socket set, bottles, the pump. That's the cap inside the well that goes down in there and plug it. That's a flush mount valve. It's flush with the ground. There's a stick up. You can see the PVC coming out. Here we go. Round 1 was collected last fall. Round 2 was collected this spring. These are the results that exceed MCLs. You can see TCE and MW1 at 5.6 ppb. That's the well that's located on site. MCL's 5. And then you see iron and manganese. Those are the exceedances during round 1. It's round 2. You can see again we had iron, manganese, benzene popped up this time, and the TCE is below standard.
Where's the,
What's that?
water treatment well 4, where's that?
That's the one down past the bank on the right-hand side by the insurance company. On Route 11. It's
Yeah,
that.
okay.
I'll show you a map. Stripping out from the data set TCE and 1,2-DCE, which are the 2 contaminants that appear that they're linked up to the former Atlas business site. These are the results for round 1 going down, MW1 through MW8, plus the previous well that was on site. Round 1, and then round 2. So if we just look at this portion of the table right now, you'll see during the fall, you had 5.6 parts per billion of TCE. During the spring, you had 2.4. So that one dropped. MW2, it stayed pretty much the same. MW3 was pretty much the same. It was undetected here. The U means it's undetected. The J means it's estimated. It means when they were running the technique at the lab, they couldn't nail it down to that specific point. They give you a very specific number, so it looks good. Like that should be the exact number. But when you look at the backup QC data associated with it, you can't specifically say that that's the number. It could be up a little higher, it could be a little bit lower. It's an estimated quantity, they call it.
QC stands for quality control.
Right. You can see see those staying undetected, MW4 and MW5, at 1 part per billion. This one dropped from round 1 to round 2. That one stayed the same. That one stayed pretty much the same. And that one was undetected. You can see during the 2 rounds again, this is 1,2-DCE, dichloroethene. Same type of trend. You see it high here and it dropped. It was higher here and it dropped in half. Stayed pretty much the same, and then it was undetected in all the rest of the wells. Someone's going to eventually ask, why did it do this? I don't know. Could be a moisture issue. We have a real wet winter, a lot of snow. Did it flush through the system and sort of dilute it a little bit? Groundwater flow direction. Here's your site again. Bull Run Road, Route 11. These lines here, those are groundwater elevation lines, like you're looking at a topographic map, USGS quad map or something along those lines. Groundwater flows perpendicular to those lines. So groundwater flow would flow like this, down that line. Here it would come down, at that point it would turn a little and then come back. So groundwater flow goes this way. It's going from the site, that's our background well, off-site, up on Bull Run Road. From there, here, it's all flowing down towards the Shazy, right here. Which makes sense. From our downhole geophysics, the previous presentation, and you'll see it in your packet once again from the previous meeting minutes. There's a slide that shows real rough MW1 and MW2. It shows the groundwater and how it looks like it's discharged into the Shazy. So this makes sense. It's flowing down towards the town. When you couple this slide, which shows it coming this way, with that slide, here's the site again, Route 11, Bull Run Road. This line right here shows where we found TCE detected at any concentration in any of the homeowner wells, in any of the monitoring wells that we installed. So this is the outer boundary, estimated outer boundary of the TCE from what we're seeing. We see it on site at 5.6. These are round 1 results from that previous table. It's undetected in the background well. It's detected on site. It's detected in MW3, 8, 2, and 6. Was not detected in 7 or 4. The homes inside this line have TCE detected in it. And it sort of gives us a boundary. That's the estimated boundary of where the TCE is. That's it for the results. If you have questions, I'll answer them at the end.
Yeah, my well is less than 200 feet from number 7. I have TCE. My neighbor's well is less than 100 feet from number 7, and they have TCE.
We can look at the map.
How deep is number 7?
65 feet.
My well is 43. My well is 5.
We can take a look at the specifics in the Q&A period. I'm going to move on to risk assessment. In a few minutes, when I get through with this, you're going to see where risk assessment fits into the Dirt Fuzz program. We've done an investigation, and you're going to see a flow chart on how it flows through the process. I'm going to give you a real high-level primer on risk assessment. I'm not a risk assessment expert, I'm an engineer, so you can ask questions at the end. Dr. Major, I talked with him before the meeting, and he has a much more in-depth understanding of risk assessments, so he'll probably be able to answer the questions better than I, but I'll give it a shot. 2 types of risk assessments, ecological and human health. I'll go over what the difference is between those two. A risk assessment. Evaluating the likelihood of damage done at various levels of uncertainty and effort. That's a mouthful. I was told by Joan that that was too complex. Her first question was, define that. I said, I can't. She goes, define damage. What do you mean by damage? It adversely affects something. It affects, a person in some way, shape, or form adversely. It damages them in some form. It damages a worm. It doesn't crawl as fast. It does some sort of damage to something. Uncertainty and effort. Some point in the near future, we're going to have to get more in depth into these issues, and I'll bring risk assessment experts to discuss this, and they can go more into uncertainty and effort. The greater amount of data, the greater the certainty of result. If you had 1,000 wells out here and you sampled them for 20 years, they could really nail down with certainty what the risks are to the population. Unfortunately, we don't have that data. We have 247 groundwater samples from the wells of homeowners, as well as 2 rounds on our mining wells. My human health risk assessor says that's more data than he normally gets to do risk assessments. So he's pretty pleased with the amount of data, which will mean that the certainty for him is going to be pretty good. He'll be able to use that data and with certainty come up with a good risk assessment. In a few slides, I'm going to go over the difference between risk assessment versus risk management. Right now, I'm telling you what risk assessment is. In a minute, I'm going to tell you what risk management is. Okay? So risk assessment is evaluating the likelihood of damage done at various levels of uncertainty. 2 types, I said, human and ecological. Human health risk assessments are fairly straightforward. There's one receptor, us, humans. There's a predefined model inputs. They understand the model. They understand humans. They understand the contaminants. They can model dosage, how much you receive by drinking the water or taking a shower. So it's pretty straightforward for human health because there's one receptor. They understand the models, and they can work through the equations mathematically. Ecological is a whole different ballgame. You have multiple receptors. You've got crickets, you've got deer, you've got fish, cows. You've got all different types of receptors out there. You have different trophic levels. You've got the worms, you have birds that eat the worms, you've got the raptors that eat the birds. So it works up through a food chain effect also. So there's different levels as opposed to humans, there's only one level. Their site-specific inputs are important. Is it in the soil? Is it in the surface water? Is it in the groundwater? Is it in the sediment in the streams? Experimental studies can be done. They can take the worms, put them in a clean environment, put them in an environment that's contaminated with TCE, and see how many die off. So they can do studies to see if we put healthy worms in the soil on site, do they stay healthy? Or do they, not perform as well? So they could actually do studies. And then there's the concern for resource damage as part of the remedy. If you're going to go out and clean up a site, are you going to wipe out 20 different endangered species? To save a little grub in the ground, because that's the only thing being affected is this little grub. There's got to be a trade-off balance associated with it. How are risks assessed? Human health risks, they look at soil, groundwater, surface water standards, guidelines. They look at benchmarks. I was asking my risk assessor for what they compare it to. Risk-based concentration. They calculate hazard quotients. All these terms are very technical, and I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I probably couldn't define them. So those are going to have to be defined at a later date. This process needs to take place as part of a risk assessment. You have to compare it to certain standards, very conservative standards, to see if there's risk, and do modeling to determine that risk. Ecological, it's the same type of thing. You look at screening guidelines, and you do the modeling. Don't worry about this. It's ugly. All you need to get out of this slide is for ecological risk assessments following EPA guidelines, there's 8 steps. I'm going to move to the easier slide. This is the first 2 steps in the process that need to be done for ecological. Screen level assessment, steps 1 and 2. You take the existing information that we've collected on the site, from the groundwater, soil gas, and you do a screening level. They come to the site and they look and they see what's being impacted. Is there deer out there? You know, what kind of bugs are on the ground? What kind of birds are out on the site? Does the runoff from that site come down and enter a stream? Do the cows drink out of the stream? You know, what are the receptors? That's where you're looking at the problem formulation. You know, who's being impacted by this? What animals? Look at the toxicity. How toxic are the chemicals that are out there? Look at TCE. Is that toxic? You know, are the metals that are out on site toxic to certain creatures? Well, they'll look at those toxicity of those chemicals. They'll look at exposures estimates. You know, birds. It's a 10-acre site. They're only going to feed on that site for a portion of their life, and they're going to feed in other locations. So they have to look at what's the exposure for those animals. And then you calculate a risk based upon all that information. You input it in a model and you get a risk. Once you get that risk, you have to make a decision. Is there risk? Is there sufficient risk to do something? To go on to the next step. SMDP, Scientific Management Decision Point. On that other complicated chart, you see them down the whole right side. There's a bunch of them. The risk assessor and the risk manager have to get together and go, okay, here's the risk. What does that risk mean? Is there enough risk there that we need to do a full-blown ecological risk assessment? Do we need to go out now and puree worms and send them to the lab for analysis? Do we need to go out and kill birds and take their stomach contents to see what they're eating so that we can determine stuff like that? That becomes very involved, very complex. If there is little to no risk, at this point, a management decision is made that you don't do a full-blown risk assessment. That the risks don't exceed a threshold. I haven't defined what that threshold is. That still needs to be defined. EPA guidelines for a baseline human health risk assessment. It's the same process as the ecological. You look at the hazards. Are they carcinogens or non-carcinogens? What are the chemical concentrations? For here it would be mostly the groundwater. Summarize all the data, and then you go to step 2 and you look at exposure assessment. How are you exposed? Drinking the water, taking the showers, watering the lawn. How are you exposed? Who's exposed? Children, adults? What's the population? How are they exposed? Said that again. How much exposure? What are the chemical dosage? Then you move to toxicity. How much of the chemical can cause harm? Use the EPA databases to determine toxicity potential. Very conservative guidelines. Then you come down and you calculate risk. You combine this information and you look at probability. What's the probability of someone with this exposure scenario developing cancer? What's the exposure, with this exposure scenario, what's the possibility of this person being sick or having some long-term impact or damage? Are they safe?
for the non-carcinogens? And what's the uncertainty? Once again, that gets back to the data set. The more data, the better the certainty. And then we make some sort of recommendation to the Corps and to the Department of Health and to the DEC. And we say, this is the model, this is what we looked at, these are the risks. You know, we need to make a management decision. That's where you get these scientific management endpoints. Which leads to risk management, which is different than risk assessment. Risk assessment is sort of the scientific end of it. You go out and collect the data, you do the models, you look at exposure scenarios, you calculate a risk. Risk management is an agreed upon conclusion of these assessments, saying that we agree that there are risks, they're site-related, they're not site-related. Why? If they are site-related, what's the destruction, habitat destruction, or the effectiveness of the remedy? What are the ARs? We'll go into these in more detail later at a later meeting. What's the overlap between the ecological and human risk assessments? Is there an overlap? Is it possible to control the source? Are the third-party stakeholders and institutional controls that can be in place? Institutional controls would be something like installing a water district instead of having pumping from the wells. It's an engineering control is what that is. Capping a site if there's thermal contact. Putting an asphalt cap on the site. Those are engineering controls or institutional controls. When you look at all of this, a decision has to be made. This is where it comes down to the nuts and bolts, and someone says, there are no risks, you know, the investigation's over with. And they'll go through the dirt floods process and how that works. When you look at risk assessment, and if there is risk or no risk. Those hurdles that need to go over to determine whether or not there's risk, the height of them hasn't been placed yet. That's something that we have to work out between the Corps and the regulators once we develop these models. I will turn it over to the Corps to go over the dirt floods process.
Is there anybody here that is the first time at a lab meeting? Okay. Well, FUDS stands for Formerly Utilized Defense Site. It's one of the programs from Corps of Engineers, and we only address sites that were previously used by the Department of Defense, and we no longer own. That's what FUDS stands for. And we have a program manual that more or less tells us this is the steps you have to take. We have 4 different type of projects in the FUDS program. We have environmental HCRW, we have ordnance, we have building demolition, debris removal, and we have underground storage tanks. Of course, this one goes under environmental HCRW. The FUDS, one of the most important things in the FUDS is that we have to work very closely with the regulators and the stakeholders. The state, we need their concurrence on what direction we're going to go. We work with the Department of Health, with the county, and of course with the public. And the public plays a role all along, and there's a stage in the next flow chart, and we go, it'll show where the biggest role comes. In this chart, we're actually more or less in the middle of it, where we've been involved with the site since 1988. And we've done, as Steve spoke, we've done several different investigations, which is part of the remedial investigation. His report is right under there. Remedial investigation, maybe you want to go to the next one? Here you go. We're at the beginning now of this chart, remedial investigation. We're towards the end of it now. There's no more sampling we're going to take. He's going to put together all this data and submit a report. And then the next step is the risk assessment, which is what he talked about. We will have another RAD meeting, and at that RAD meeting, we will have the experts on risk assessment talk about what has been done. Now, this risk assessment, again, has to be in compliance with the stakeholders. You know, the state has to agree. We have different regulations we go by, but we do have one that we both have to comply with, which is the National Contingency Plan. So that's one common factor, and we work together. Sometimes we might not agree on things, but we do work and get it done. We have the same objective, that's the same mission goal, same objective. Depending on that risk assessment, as you can see there, if there's an unacceptable risk, we don't do a feasibility study. We will jump straight to the public notice proposed plan. And that,
If there's unacceptable risk for feasibility, if there's an acceptable risk.
right,
Right.
okay. If there's an unacceptable, just like the chart said, you go to the public notice. And I believe 30 days?
If there's unacceptable risk, you do a feasibility study.
Right.
If there's acceptable risk, you don't do the feasibility study and you go to the proposed plan.
Right. So we go to the public notice proposed plan regardless, either way we go.
Right.
And I believe it's a 30-day review. We hope to get to that point by the end of the fall. Right, Steve? Hopefully,
Depends
on the risk assessment, finish the risk assessment.
if the risk assessment does not show unacceptable risk, so it has acceptable risk, at that point, we can go to this public notice.
Which will probably happen the end of the fall.
End of the
If
year.
it's not,
Yeah.
then we have to do a feasibility study that's gonna be very lengthy.
Again, the risk assessment is based on availability of funding as well, because we are currently in fourth quarter, and normally by the end of fourth quarter, all awards have already been done, contractors or whatever, so we most of the time have to wait until 1 October until the new fiscal year starts and our new budget kicks in. So, again, depending on availability of funding, we may not be able to actually even do a contract action to get the risk assessment on the contract until first quarter, which starts 1 October.
Well, this is we have over 160 projects in our district. And we only work in anywhere to 8 to 12, depending on the funding. Our funding is around $4 million. We need $7 million to keep the projects we have going. But we've been told we're only getting $4 million. We're trying to get $3 million more. But what we normally do is we continue to fund the projects that are open, like this one. So I'm optimistic that we will get the funding to continue this and close it. Once, I guess the flow chart is self-explanatory, we go to a rod. Another thing I wanted to inform you is every month I meet with my commander, and I have to inform him of the status of the meeting. And I have relayed the public concerns. Cynthia and I talk frequently, and she tells me what the public's concerns are, and I have relayed them to the colonel. One thing I'd like to suggest is if you want to send letters to me forward, especially during that public comment period, that would also provide the backup to go. Because as a project manager, all I do is make recommendations to the colonel. I have to make recommendations through the program manager, and then through him goes to the colonel, and he ultimately makes the final decision. As long as it's below a certain money amount, which is $6 million. That was a question before at the last meeting, is who makes the final decision, and it's basically colonel. We have a new colonel, his name is Colonel John O'Dowd. O-apostrophe D-O-W-D. He just took command this past Monday, the 16th. He will be, usually they last about 3 years. I'm very optimistic because his bio shows an extensive environmental background. He has taught at a couple universities in environmental, so that's something different from our previous commander. So that's good. You don't have to. It's explain too much to him because he's already very knowledgeable in the environmental field. That's it.
I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. May. You do not have this presentation in your packet. So if we need to, it will be attached to the meeting minutes that come out. So you will get it eventually. If you jot down notes, you have to write it down on the presentation you have. Just left click and
Let's do a little change of pace on this. If somebody has a question or a comment, bring it up now. You might forget it by the time we get around to answering it. I'm Mick Major. I'm from the use of Chippewa. Well, who's that? The use of Chippewa is a preventive medicine proponency for the Army. We're concerned with the health of the soldier. That's our primary concern. We also support cleanups by the fact that we look at the toxicity of the compounds. I'm in the directorate of toxicology. This directorate is a rather large directorate. We have a large animal test facility, and we also have the Health Effects Research Program. This is my program. And essentially we're all researchers in there, scientists. I very much like to come out here and do these things because you get some of the best feedback. You get what people's concerns are. We put out information papers and we try to explain this, and a lot of times we miss the mark totally unless we get some feedback from the people. We do get good feedback from the Corps of Engineers and from contractors like Wes, but we'd also like to hear from you. This is my phone number, and this is my fax, and this is my email. And if you have a question that comes to you later, certainly feel free to give me a call, and we'll talk to you. The one thing I would like to say about Chippewa is we have no ore in the water as far as cleanup. It doesn't affect our budget one way or the other. If the Corps wants to go out and spend all their money on one place or anything, it doesn't matter to us because we're not funded by that. We report directly to the Army Surgeon General, and that's the only guy we have to worry about. Our point of the realm is trust. We don't ever fudge any facts. We try to present the truth, the whole truth, so everybody understands it. If we didn't do that, we couldn't do the rest of our job at all. In the left click?
left click.
Okay. Now, one of the first things you want to be concerned about with TCE is what happens to it in the environment. Where's it going? Now, the water solubility of TCE is about 1,000 parts per million. Your drinking water standard is 5 parts per billion. We're looking at something like, it could be 1,000,000 times as bad as it is. If you understand what I'm saying. 1,000 parts per million is roughly a million times greater than your low parts per billion low. So there's plenty of leeway in here. You have a very low level of TCE here. It may be from a variety of factors. They tell me that the aquifer moves pretty quick. There isn't a lot of mixing time. TCE, you have to realize, is much heavier than water. When it gets into the soil and starts to permeate the soil, most of it's going to be given off as gas. It's going to come back out. But what gets into the aquifer will penetrate the water, go beneath the water, and sit. And the water essentially caps off it's outgassing. So the only way you lose it is the small amount that dissolves in the water. Now, if this is sitting, picture, it's sitting in little crevices in the rocks, there may not be an awful lot of surface area that would allow it to mix with the water. Does that make sense? The water here is not like the water back home in Maryland. The water here is very cold. Groundwater is usually the same as the average temperature of your region, and you get some pretty cold winters up here. So the colder the water is, the less well it mixes, the less it dissolves. Russ, did you have a question? Huh? Okay. So that's it with side-blown intestine. Just remember that it's beneath the water and it may not mix very well with it. The log KOW is 2.42. What does that mean? If you take a compound and you put it in a mixture of water and an alcohol called octanol, and mix it up, the water and alcohol form two phases, sort of like oil and vinegar in an Italian dressing. Now, if you look at how much of the compound goes up top in the octanol and how much goes at the bottom of the water, it gives you a very good indication of how much will be absorbed if it gets on your skin. Compounds that tend to have more of it go into the octanol will tend, if you get this stuff on your skin and water, will tend to leave the water and go in your skin the same way it goes into the octanol. Now, a log KOW of 2.4 is a log. It means it's something like 300 times is likely to go into the octanol as into the water. This stuff will penetrate your skin like a shot. If you drink it, it'll penetrate the membranes in your mouth or GI tract pretty well too. The Henry's law of this compound is important too. Well, why is it important? Henry's law is an indicator of how much will leave the water if you have it in a vapor form. Now, say you're taking a shower. You turn on the water, you get a nice hot shower. Some of that TCE is going to leave the water in the shower, go into the air, and you can breathe it. That gives you a second exposure. You're not just drinking it. You're breathing it. It can also penetrate your skin. Your exposure is, okay? Now, how much? You think not much goes out of this? Well, we did a little calculation. Almost all Henry's laws are calculated. There's such a bugger to do experimentally. And the calculations do a good job. We did a calculation with this. Over half, you take a hot shower, and you have one of the shower heads that really, really atomizes it. An awful lot can leave the water and get into the air. The half-life in air is pretty long. In fact, that's one of the ways the TCE gets in the groundwater. TCE that's released will go up in the atmosphere and come down as rain. It lasts that long. The sun and atmospheric reactions don't seem to destroy it very effectively. So if you go out and measure your rain, you're going to have TCE. It's stable in groundwater. I guess Steve already talked about that. Once it's down in the groundwater, or it's beneath the groundwater and cracks, it's going to be there a long time. It's awful hard to bioremediate. People have tried different ways, put microbes down, what have you. It really hasn't worked very well. It is biodegraded once it gets into the soil. Some microbes, once it's there in an atmosphere that has oxygen and has microbes, they can start to degrade it. The degradation rate varies all over the map, as you might guess. There's some places they can degrade it pretty fast. Any question on the properties of environmental fate? You sort of have a picture now what's happening to it when it hits the ground, once you got the spill? Yes, sir.
Well, if you have like 2 parts per billion in your water, you're going to be exposed to that whether you breathe the vapors, drink it, or take a shower in it, correct?
Correct.
It's not going to turn into 12 parts per billion just because you can absorb it through the skin and all of this other, you still only have that one quantity.
Right, but what I'm saying is you have multiple exposure rates. And you can't just think of this as something that you drink. Yes, ma'am.
The last time I saw your presentation, you had said that at the low levels of TCE that we have, you know, if you're below 1,000 parts per million, basically most of that is dissolved in the water. It's not going to sink or, you know, you're not going to end up with a DNAPL type thing. Is that correct? So at the low parts per billion that we have up here at Atlas S11, most of it is dissolved in the water.
You are well below the solubility limits, but the TCE that's in the ground probably is not dissolved in the water. Wouldn't you say that? The TCE is probably in fractured bedrock.
Considering we seem to be in a steady state condition, it's not going down. It's been here for years. It's most likely in a dead-end fracture or it's smeared on a fracture somewhere. You'd have to poke a million holes to find that one little fracture it's in.
Right.
So,
Or maybe a multiple fracture.
exactly, but there's probably some small quantity somewhere, be a large quantity somewhere. And like he's saying, it's just coming by and it's just picking up a little at a time. The thing is, if we saw over 1,000 parts per million, we could say we've got a free phase plume somewhere of real solid DNAPL that we could do something about. We could get to.
DNAPL is dense, non-aqueous phase liquid. Things that won't mix with the liquid and are heavier, like TCE, remember, it's denser, it sinks, is a DNAPL. Yes, ma'am.
The bacteria that are biodegraded, are they aerobic or anaerobic?
Both. Yeah, it can be degraded both ways. The bioremediation schemes tend to run towards anaerobic when you try to force it.
Therefore, it would biodegrade underwater?
It would, the part that's in the water, the part that's in solubility, the part that's under the water would not. You see, your microbes, even if you pump air down there and you give them molasses or something to work with, they still can only handle the part that's in solution, which is, you know, they can't get down into the rock away from the water. They can't live there. You know, they live in the water. I've never seen it work really well for TCE, and especially if you have fractured bedrock, it makes it a lot harder because the microbes just can't.
You need an organic source down there. That's why we're saying put molasses down there. It's just like fermenting beer or any other thing. For the microbes to live, they need a carbon source.
Well, in other words, leaking septic tanks help the situation.
You think they might? Yes.
In that they're giving a little nutrient.
So,
Dr. Major, back to this gentleman's question. What he was asking was, and I don't know that I understood the answer, if you drink 2 parts per billion, and 2 parts per billion touches your skin in the shower, and you're breathing 2 parts per billion through whatever, is that going to give you more of the TCE because of the multiple ways that you come in contact with it, a person comes in
Right.
contact?
If you just drink it, you'll get this much. If you drink it and shower in it, your exposure will be greater, your absorption will be greater. You'll absorb more. You know what I'm saying? Exposure routes tend to be additive. Even though your concentration of the water is still,
The same.
you know, parts per billion.
and that's what the risk assessment would look at. Those exposure routes and what the risks are associated with.
With the human health, we tend to look at what you breathe, what you ingest, and what comes through your skin. There's other exposure routes, like what can, with the chemical warfare agents that we deal with, they can actually, you can get enough of a dose going through your eyes. But, you know, for a normal toxic, you don't have those exposure. All right. Acute health effects. Now, I'm talking about acute. That means right now. if I was to put some in this room right now, what would we have? I'm not talking about 20 years down the road if you're drinking water. This is an acute effect. You notice that they're very high, 95 parts per million. You're talking about parts per billion, and this is an inhalation. In humans, you inhale something on the order of 20 cubic meters of air a day. So 95 parts per million gives you a terrific exposure. We're going to talk more about the numbers later. Okay? Hematopoietic effect. That means it'll have effect on your body's ability to generate red cells and white cells. It can have effect on your immune system.
Just so everyone understands the math, 95 parts per million is the same as 95,000 parts per billion. Just multiply it by 1,000. You'll get parts per billion.
We'll talk more about that later. That's a very good point. And because this is inhalation, you get even more. Because you inhale, in a day, you inhale a lot more substance than you drink. Okay? Hepatic effects. This hepatic is your liver. You can affect the liver at 200 parts per million. Again, at a terrifically high level. Ocular effects, your eyes will start to burn, and cardiac effects will affect your heart. Again, remember this is the acute effects. This is what it takes to hurt you really quickly. What happened? Can we go back? That one. Chronic effects. Okay, chronic effects other than cancer. Remember we said there's pathological effects here, hematological effects here. It was about 95 parts per million in an acute situation. If you have a long-term exposure, you're breathing this rather long time, 50 parts per million will do the same effect. Neural effect. TCE in the past was used as an anesthetic. Like, remember the old things people would soak a rag and use it to restore form? TCE was used in the exact same way. In fact, it was used a lot more in chloroform. One of our best populations of people that we looked at the health effects of TCE was nurse anesthetists. These gals were in there anesthetizing patients all day with them. So they got a relatively large exposure. And the nice thing about this exposure was it was pure TCE. Almost anything, anywhere else, that you have the same problem you have here. You never get a pure compound. If somebody exposes to TCE, they're also exposed to chloroform. You've got coliforms in the well, you've got benzene, other petroleum products. It's very hard to get somebody, to get a population to look at that just had exposure to a single compound. But we do have this for TCE. Cardiac effects. At 172, again, hepatic effects, again, way high. This, you see it in the hepatic enzymes. I don't know if you've ever gone into the hospital and they test your blood, they start looking for enzymes that were released from your liver and see if they were elevated. If you had liver damage, the cell would rupture and the enzymes were released. Renal effects as well. Okay. Cancer. Now, who's on the RAB in here? You're on the RAB? There's a few people in this room that really, if you're on the RAB, you ought to try to understand this next concept. It's really not that technical, but it is cutting edge research. Okay? There's two types of carcinogens. One is called genotoxic, the other is called epigenetic. Now, back in the old days, when we were looking at carcinogens, we said, this thing is a carcinogen because it goes in and affects your DNA. And it makes a change in your DNA. It makes a mutation in your DNA that causes a cancer. That was term genotoxic because it was toxic to the your gene pool, okay? Now, the other is epigenetic. And this is the way we're going now. Anymore, we're saying a carcinogen is something that gives you cancer. And it doesn't matter whether or not the cancer was due to its effect on your DNA. There's other ways of getting cancer. Is there anybody in here that remembers goiter? And you remember it was from insufficient iodine. Now, what happens with goiter is there isn't enough iodine in your diet, and your thyroid is supposed to be making thyroxine, which controls basic metabolism. Yes? You're swatting flies. So you're not producing enough iodine. Your brain, your hypothalamus and your brain realizes that, and it starts sending out thyroid stimulating hormone. And what happens, there just isn't enough iodine there. So no matter how much it stimulates the thyroid, you can't generate the thyroxine because you don't have the starting materials. So what happens is the thyroid starts to grow, and you have this goiter in your throat. They used to just lop them right out surgically, take out the parathyroids too, and then you had, you couldn't control your basic metabolism. You also knocked out the parathyroid, so you couldn't control your calcium metabolism. It made a mess of it. People found you could get around that just by using iodized salt. Now the Air Force, and to a lesser extent the Army as well, has a pollutant that we're looking at now called ammonium perchlorate. It's rocket fuel. And what it does is it blocks the thyroid from picking up the iodine. So you can get the same goiter situation by having a lot of perchlorate around. Now, if you take more iodine, it overwhelms the effect of the perchlorate, and it's harmless. But those people that are borderline, that are just barely getting enough iodine, it pushes them over. Now look at the difference. Something affects your genes directly. One molecule goes in and hits that gene, hits that DNA, and makes a break. Makes it a cross-link. Makes a frame mutation in there. So how many molecules does it take to cause cancer? Theoretically. One. That's why, for years, we've had a cancer slope factor. You do your animal tests, and you find your lowest level, and then you drew a line right down to 0, and you said the incidence of cancer from very low levels won't be great, but it'll still be a definite effect. It'll still give cancer to 1 out of a million, 1 out of 100,000, 1 out of 10,000, because it's mathematically there. Now, how about something like perchlorate? Perchlorate works as a threshold. Low levels don't have any effect, right? Because it has to block that uptake of iodine. So why would we draw a line? And what we're beginning to negotiate now, and the EPA is buying in, is that we shouldn't. We should handle it as a threshold. Now, you've got parts per billion levels in some of your wells of TCE. Does it matter if it's epigenetic or genotoxic? Yeah. Because don't forget, that goiter will turn into a cancer in some people. Epigenetic carcinogens do cause cancer. So we'll talk more about which is it. When you're looking at a toxicant too, what I wanted to get across here, that it's very important to look at the type of neoplasms. Toxicants just don't cause cancer. They cause a specific kind of cancer. They told me before we came in here that somebody wanted to start looking at cancer incidents, is that right? That's a good thing to do. A lot of people say this is a very small community, you never see it, 1 in 100,000, you only got 1,000 people, you need 100 generations to see something. Well, don't forget, they found AIDS with a very small population because they were all getting the same type of cancer. I don't think you're going to see anything, but I want to tell you how to do this. Look for cancer. Plot it on the map. Plot what the concentration in the wells is. Plot the type of cancer. Because remember, a certain toxicant usually generates a certain toxic endpoint, a certain cancer. Okay? Plot the age. If you have a whole bunch of old men dying from lung cancer that were smokers, it doesn't mean a thing. If you have young people, because age is very important, if you have young people dying from a relatively, or contracting a relatively rare type of cancer, they're all in a bunch, and they're all in a hot spot where a compound is the highest concentration, then you've got something that means something. But you have to link them all up. Okay, now, usually when we look for a technical definition from a legal organization like the Environmental Protection Agency, you go to one of their divisions. Environmental Carcinogenesis Division, National Health and Environmental Effects Research Laboratory is the people that make the call. Is it a carcinogen? What type of carcinogen is it? How should we address it? And risk assessment. Can you see this back there? This is an important quote. What they're saying is for TCE, we conclude that the weight of the evidence argues that chemically induced mutation, that's a genotoxic event, is unlikely to be a key event in the induction of human tumors that might be caused by TCE. As the parent compound and its metabolites affect the human genome. This conclusion derives primarily from the fact that these chemicals require very high doses to be genotoxic. So what they're saying is these things can affect the cell, they can affect the DNA, but only when you have a bunch of it in there. And what it is, it's not a specific chemical effect it's due to an interaction between this compound and the DNA. It has something to do with the solid, because this is a solid, and solids are just very destructive for tissue. Now, when you have to put it in at very high concentrations and you have something that's toxic like a solvent, independent of being carcinogenic, what you do is you make a lot of small breaks in the DNA. And people used to say, oh, terrible, genotoxic. But then they realized a cell with anything like that DNA damage could never survive. And one thing is sure, you don't get cancer when you're dead. So that's pretty much what it means. The experts in the field are saying that this is not a genotoxic carcinogen. So any cancer effects we'd expect to see in the threshold, and the threshold is probably going to be a pretty high level. We'll talk more about that. Sites of tumor genesis. The kidney. The kidney has the best dose response curve for any organ in the body. The problem with the kidney, though, with neoplasms, is that it's a filter organism. And if you get cancer anywhere else and it starts to metastasize, it starts to move, you have a metastatic carcinoma, the cells are filtered out by the kidney and they grow there. So whenever you see the kidney is the best tissue, you always say yeah, okay, but hepatocellular tumors in B6C3F1. This is a hybrid mouse that has given the Army fits over the years because in the late 70s and early 80s, we decided to go in and start running cancer studies on a lot of things, on our explosives and some of our chemical warfare agents, and, you know, some propellants and everything. And we ran them in this mouse. This mouse happens to be exquisitely sensitive to liver insults. We found if we change the bedding from pine to cedar, you could generate liver cancers in this animal. So we ran all these studies, and some of them we had cellular cancers, and we found now we don't know how to handle the data because it doesn't seem to relate to any other animal. It doesn't seem to relate to people. So again, the kidney is weak because it's a filter organization. The hepatocellular is weak because it was done in this. The only positive effect was in this animal. In just a minute, we're going to talk about how many wells in this country have this, and you know why the data is very strong. Okay, lymphatic cancer. This is a rather high level still. All right. One of the best endpoints as far as good sound data that wasn't compromised was in the nurse anesthetist that we talked about. That we're giving this every day. There was some reproductive effects. There was increased miscarriages. Other occupational exposures like dry cleaners that used to use this, where you were in there and the vapors were overpowering all day long, they had some reproductive effects as well. When they looked at birth defects, that didn't seem to be there. The compound didn't generate a birth defect, but it did generate a spontaneous abortion. The NOEL values were from 240 to 488 milligram per kilogram per day.
What's the one?
Oh, I'm sorry, NOEL. No observed adverse effect level. Jargon. A NOEL is the lowest point you usually run. That's the highest point you see that's lower than your endpoint. And let me tell you, this is a real squishy number because once you get down very, very low and you start titrating this dose down, it gets less and less and less and less. It's very hard to see when you don't have an effect anymore. But you take your best shot. It's just like mixing red dye and water. You know, you mix a lot, you say, yeah, it's in there, and then dilute it. What point can't you detect it anymore? It's very hard, because the statistics are very weak, unless you use a terrific number of animals. But I'd like to call your attention to this number down here, 240 to 400 to 844 milligram per kilogram a day. That means no observed effect at 844 milligram per kilogram a day, or 240. Now, probably the men in this room, if average man in America is 70 kilograms, probably in this room, maybe 110 kilograms. So this is like 240 milligrams, which is about a quarter of a gram, multiplied by 100 per day. You realize how much that is? That's a bunch. You want to punch that out for me? Quarter of a gram times 100 grams, 25 grams. A gram is like a paper. That's a lot. We're talking about parts per billion. You realize how little a part per billion is? The one I used to like, I thought was a good example. If you take from the time of Christ to now, 2,000 years, what's a billion of? 63 seconds. It's just a tiny, tiny fraction of what's there. But what we see as the Noel, the point where we can no longer see any effects, is not a tiny fraction. It's a whole lot of TCE. Okay, before we go into this, I'd like to tell you, I thought it was on an earlier slide, but we must have deleted it from the last slide, so it used to be there. We talked about TCE as a national problem. It is a national problem. Dr. Candy was here from the ATSDR, the Toxic Substances people. They're a good group, good bunch of people. The ATSDR was initiated back when Congress did the Superfund regulations and they established CERCLA. They generated the ATSDR. They put funds in there, so the ATSDR, money is paid. All they got to do is look out for the American people. They don't have to clean anything up. All they have to do is be honest workers. They've done an excellent job. I don't know if you've read any of their tox literature. Our library has it all there because it's all excellent. It's written at a level that anybody who's diligent could read it and understand it. But if you need the tax data, it's in there. Okay? There's been an awful lot of studies done on TCE. About one well out of 3, or maybe even one well out of 2, or one water source, contains TCE. Okay. I wish I could put this up.
Want it?
Yeah. I wouldn't delay this like this, but this is probably the most important thing for you that I'm going to give you tonight. I apologize for not putting it on the electronic version.
Way too big. That way is way too big.
Okay.
This down.
The two together is nice. Multimedia. Okay. TCE is a common pollutant. Now, is this good for you or is this bad for you? I think it's real good. Because what it says is you're not in this boat alone. And nobody can ignore your TCE problems. And because it's found in as many as 1/3 of the drinking water sources in this country, 1/3 is a bunch. It's probably found in virtually all the ones in California. So, you're not alone. And there's going to be an awful lot of effort put into doing this. And there has been. There's been numerous acute, chronic, and subchronic studies. An acute study is one where you look at effects right away. Chronic study, you look at the entire life of the animal. We usually compromise and do a sub-chronic study, which takes about 3 months. Expose the animal for 3 months, and usually if there's an effect, you'll see it in that amount of time. It's there. It comes from a variety of sources, but mostly it's degreasing. What were they doing here with it? Were they wiping down?
Cleaning parts.
Does anybody have a...
It sort of varied from parts cleaning to working Quonset huts, field maintenance in parts cleaning again, to cleaning contacts on the circuitry for the missile.
That's usually where it comes from. People want to get soda grease off of things and they use it. It's effective even in the vapor phase. It can strip grease pretty effectively. There's a large occupationally exposed population that dates back over half a century. Like I said, people used it for anesthesia, they used it for dry cleaning, they used it for prepping for paint. We have a large epidemiological base of people who had a large exposure and now are old. And that's a best population. You'll see some effects in those people if the effects are there. Considerable animal testing was done. However, uncertainty about the toxic effects remain. And the reason for that is it just isn't very toxic. In the Army, we deal an awful lot with the effects of chemical weapons because right now we're destroying the chemical weapons stockpile. And you have to be very careful how you destroy them. You don't just pile them up and pile and blow them up. We looked at incineration and other things. We have no problem with the toxic effects of chemical weapons, even though there hasn't been a lot of testing done, because it's unequivocal. You know, these things are terrifically toxic and at low concentrations. TCE is not very toxic, and the toxicity effect don't occur until the concentration is very, very high. And that's just the nature of the beast. All right. Is there a way to break it up?
It will come up to
It
speed.
will come up?
Takes a second.
I'll be patient.
It's getting old.
All right. Bioaccumulation and biomagnification. I read there were some questions about will this stuff build up in your body over time? That was one of my research interests about 10 years ago. We looked at a lot of compounds to see what type of things would cause things to build up in your body over time. We found that there were a few things that were real showstoppers, that if these things occurred, you didn't get a buildup. The one thing was volatiles. If you had a compound that tended to go into the vapor phase very effectively, it was a volatile compound, it tended not to build up in the body. We couldn't find hardly any volatiles that would, unless they were reactive. Log KOW over 3. Remember I explained the octanol water partition? You take the logarithm of this. If it goes into octanol 1,000 times more than it goes into water, look out. It's going to build up. Because it's just your body water just won't remove it. The log KOW on TCE though is under 3, and that's just one of those rules of thumb. It doesn't tend to build up. In the body, it's subject to biodegradation. Now things that build up because your body can't destroy them. You can't change them. You can't modify them. You can't make it into a metabolite. TCE, you can. Your liver affects terrific changes on the first pass. So, from these 3 things, I can tell you with pretty good certainty that TCE is not going to build up over time. Now, the toxic effects can build up over time. Because you had a liver insult by this stuff, and it's hard on the liver at high concentration. That effect, it damaged the liver. It's going to make the liver more sensitive next time. But it's not more sensitive because there's TCE in there, it's more sensitive because the river was damaged. Okay, probably there's people in here that live out of the gardens this time of year. With some compounds, we have a compound called RDX, Rapid Detonation Explosive, and the Army has managed to put it in everything that we want to detonate just real hard and fast, like hand grenades and the projectiles on artillery shells and missiles, you know, rockets. Where the bang is really important, we put RDX. Well, RDX, we found out, has some toxicity. It's a neurotoxicant. And it builds up about 60-fold in the seeds and the fruit of plants. So you wouldn't think exposure to garden plants would be much of an effect, but if you have the wrong compound, it can be a heck of an effect. TCE doesn't appear to be that problem. TCE does not appear to reach detectable concentrations in the aerial portions of plants. So if you're looking at tomatoes, other berries, squashes, anything you're picking off the top, you're not going to get TCE in it. Now, exposure by consumption of root crops is possible. It doesn't accumulate to much extent in the roots, but it does accumulate down there. The roots don't allow a free outgassing. Cliff, if you'd like this copy, I could email you a copy of this negative.
Thank you, Charlie.
Oh, but anyway, that is a possibility. If you're living off your carrots and your potatoes, you probably would get some additional TCE exposure if you're irrigating them. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a possibility of an interreaction with other chemicals? I'm thinking a lot of us who are over 40 are probably loaded with DDT. Is there a possibility of an interreaction between TCE and what DDT may be in us?
Halogenated compounds like TCE were developed. The halides for fire suppression, the freons, polychlorinated biphenyls in transformers. They put the halogens on. The halogens are iodine, chlorine, bromine, fluorine, because they're non-reactive. And usually, it isn't a problem in the compounds themselves. Now, some of these compounds, once they're metabolized by the liver, you generate a toxic compound. But that's a step beyond. I don't think you got that with the mother compound. The daughters may have some activity. But again, with DDT, again, you've got a highly chlorinated compound. It's not going to react. And that's it. Is there any questions at all?
Am I reading you right? Are you saying that 5 parts per billion is not a concern?
I'll go back to slide 1. Our job at the UC Chippewa is scientists. There's a lot of people that depend on me not to get involved in the fights, if you understand what I'm saying. I just want to give the facts out, and once people understand the facts, they make their own judgment. I know your question is an obvious question, but I would just ask you to look at the concentration where we actually see effects. Now, when you do this, I don't know if somebody explained risk assessment to you, how you actually set up, say, a reference dose or any of the other benchmarks. You have a study, and most of them are done in rats. And so you have your rat data there. And the study, you didn't want to say you didn't want to spend 3 years looking at a rat till he died of old age. So you did the 90-day study, what's called the subchronic study. So then we would add an uncertainty factors of 10 to that data. We usually you don't get a no L either, no observed effect level. You get what's called low L, a lowest observed effect level. And that number isn't nearly as squishy because you really have an effect you can look at. You didn't have to try to generate what that, ascertain what that effect faded away. So you take the low L, you divide that by 10 and say, that's the no L, okay? So we get a 10-fold uncertainty factor. Well, rats aren't people. So we have a 10-fold uncertainty factor, rats to people. You didn't go the whole rat's life, you just did 90 days. So you put a 10-fold uncertainty factor for that. And these are multiplied, 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. At some point, is the person likely to be 100,000 times more sensitive than a toxicant than a rat? It just, uncertainty factors over 3,000, I question. This uncertainty factor on TCE is, of course, is very, very high. It's up in 5 figures. And that means that the human population, by that drinking water number, is being protected to a level that's, that many fold greater than what we actually saw some toxic effects of.
The chart you put up said 1/3 of the wells nationally.
Not the wells, the drinking water.
Drinking water.
Because don't forget, getting a water source in here has no guarantee that it won't have TCE in it. I mean, you could give up, you could give up the well and get a water source, and it could have more TCE than your well, and it's still within guidelines. I don't know if that would happen. Probably people would be careful to make it not happen. But places where there's a scarcity of water, that's what does happen. Most people in the urban centers are drinking TCE, and a lot of them are right up near the MCL. Dr. Candy, when he came, he was talking about centers that were looking at over 500 parts per billion. Not saying the facts.
Did that answer your question?
I know I danced around it, but that's my job.
You're very agile.
I think to sum up what you just said, is basically 5 parts per billion, which is the MCL that was established by EPA, has numerous, I don't know if you want to call them conservative factors, multipliers or whatever, that take into account, they're doing these tests on rats or whatever. They're very small animals, and they're giving them such high doses of it, and obviously they use that to try and extrapolate or whatever what would be the toxicity to a human being. But there's so many multipliers in there to make sure that whatever level they set that is a safe drinking water standard at 5 parts per billion, it's 1 in a million chance that you would get cancer or whatever if you were to drink 5 parts per billion or less for your entire lifetime, you would develop a cancer.
There's 1/3 of the water sources that have it. At what level are they?
There are various levels. Anything below 5 parts per billion in a public water supply, it's a regulated water supply, and there's no requirement for them to remediate that water. They probably have to increase their monitoring levels, testing levels, basically. If they do have TCE, but that's probably testing on an annual basis or semi-annual basis.
I would like to argue with one thing Carol said. She said 1 in a million people getting cancer. Remember, that's the people who will be listening. That's that linear extrapolation on the genotoxic events. That's not TCE. TCE, people realize it's not genotoxic. At this point, at the MCL, we feel it's not related to cancer. It's just not. Yes, sir.
If a person were uncomfortable with the levels of TCE as well, what kind or what types of filtration or whatever would take out this 2 or 2.5 parts per billion?
Carol's an engineer. She could.
Carbon filtration systems could take it out.
A
So you-
very large system, or
Well, you
would it
could,
be just a
well, you
standard?
can either do a very large system, or you can put an individual system on your own private home, where, you know, but the thing is, you wouldn't want to put it just at your drinking water source, you would want to do a whole house system, so that, you know, you're not only not drinking it, you're not showering in it, you're not being exposed to it at all.
But for an average family of 4,
You can put a carbon system on your own house, yes.
and it would be,
It would be like 2 big canisters, almost about the size of a water tank. And you would have a primary filter and a secondary filter, so that if there's breakthrough through the primary, the secondary filter will catch it.
now, these are replaced, are they backwashed, or?
You can basically change out the filters, and the life of the filter depends on household consumption and the levels of TCE coming through, but normally a carbon filtration system can last anywhere from 2, 3 to 5 years.
And also Carol, the amount of iron that's coming in the water.
Right, and the sedimentation that's going to build up on the carbon system. And you can also put sedimentation filters in and take out all that sedimentation before, so that the carbon is there just to filter out the TCE and doesn't get built up with sedimentation or iron or
Or
other
petroleum
things.
products.
Or petroleum products, right. But if you were to put a system, let's say, you know, if you were to put a system in TCE, you would want to know, do you have, you know, the bacterial problem, or do you also have petroleum problem? You know, you want a whole house system that's going to take care of all 3 contaminants, because TCE is not necessarily your greatest risk factor at this point. If you have maybe E. coli as an indicator for bacteria or NPOL in your well.
Now, this type of system would cost,
I don't know, carbon filtration
I would
system
even
plus,
hazard a guess.
I think it's like maybe,
Oh, there's
I
a
think it's
cost of-
about maybe somewhere around, well, I don't know, we installed some at one of another project or whatever, but this was several years ago, and I think the cost of actually putting in the carbon system, we were leasing them initially, and then we installed them, I think it was somewhere maybe around $1,300 or $1,500.
That's not including the sampling and the replacement.
No, that's just installing and buying the carbon filtration systems and having the system set up.
Then you've got your sampling and your carbon replacement over and above that, and
Right. You can't.
also there's something in there for polishing that uses ultraviolet light. You're talking about bulb replacement.
The thing about it,
But the initial cost is the greatest expense, and then you can sample it semi-annually or annually. Nothing says you have to sample it quarterly.
Well, no, but again, on the side of conservatism, you start off at quarterly to
Right.
figure out how bad it is, and then you adjust as you go along. If it's not that bad, and you get away with semi-annual, then you do that. And you watch that for a little while, and if you're still okay after a year with that system, then you go annual. But if you're
Again, though, you know,
site specific,
as long as the carbon system is set up for your size of household consumption, you don't want to over-design it, or under-design it, because then, you know, it's not going to be as efficient. And most of the carbon systems, I mean, they're lasting 3 to 5 years, the life cycle of a canister. And if you've got a primary and a secondary,
up here we're changing them out more often than that because of the carbon problem, or because of the iron problem. Every time you move,
so you need a water softener or something. to
every time you
basically
move
take care
gravel
of
around
it.
here, you got iron. It's just that's what it is. We
that?
change out the carbon.
Normally, you take the secondary filter, put it in the primary position, and replace the
But yeah,
secondary with a brand new
Well,
filter.
when the filters we have, that we've installed on people's houses up here, we've installed in such a way, plumbing, you turn some valves off, turn other valves on, you switch the flow around,
Right.
so it goes the other way. And so the secondary filter, like Carol's saying, becomes a primary filter, so you use up all that carbon. You take the primary filter, empty it, put new carbon in it, that becomes a secondary filter. When this filter gets dirty, you switch the plumbing around, so this filter becomes the first one, you empty out this one, and you just keep going like that.
the important thing you want to know about that, though, is that's just not going to take out your TCE. That, as I understand, there's some hits on benzene. There's some things that are squishy as far as, you know, the tox status and equivocal, because, you know, it's just not very toxic. Benzene is not one of those. Benzene has been proven human carcinogen. I don't know what the levels are here. Not my business to know.
Oh, some places have 4 feet of product in their well.
4 feet of Ellenburg.
But there may be some other things that you want to take out as well that Carver would do. Thank you very much.
That's all you're going to see. My name is Gary Gunther, and I helped work with the RAB Board Committee on the recent water supply project that was voted down. And this is to do an overview of what that means. As you all know, the vote was 125 no to 63 yay. There's approximately 15 people where new 190 goes off of old 190 that have some problems in that area, and I'm not exactly sure if it's all or what the extent of that is, but that area has to be surveyed. I know that for a fact that Barbara Bombard has drilled 2 wells on the property, and both of them were unsatisfactory for both total and E. coli. So consequently, we'll see what the extent of that is. It's very possible that we may have to have a small water district in that area if it can't be resolved on the individual lot sizes that there are. And I think we went through the community, the lots, most of the lots out here were developed in the sometime in the 1800s or the early 1900s, and they didn't grow as our affluents grew. The setbacks now are 100 feet from the absorptive part of the sewage system to your well, and a lot of lots don't have that type of setback criteria, so you can't really develop individually. That's here and there now. I plan on surveying some other areas if there's concentrated problems with water quality, whether it be petroleum, bacteria, E. coli, total coliform, or the TCEs, or the byproducts from petroleum, benzene, toluene, xylene, because these types of chemicals are not good to ingest as is it Dr. Majors? Dr. Majors indicated that wasn't good. I think one of the problems with carbon filters, though, you do have bacteria that can multiply in your filter. So you got to have pretty strong disinfection. And if you have any turbidity in your water, ultraviolet is not a good choice. Ultraviolet will work fine for a while, and then as the intensity of the light diminishes, the turbidity goes up. You have basically a false instrument that you're depending on that's not doing the job. It's not highly recommended by the health department, at least in Albany. I don't know about Clinton County, as the only source. They usually want chlorination and then UV as a backup. So you can take that wherever you want to go with it. When I was asked to do this, I think probably everybody in this room has read Viewpoint from the editors of the Press Republican in yesterday's newspaper. And I looked through that, and I pondered a little while about the results of the election, and I thought this was a synopsis that there were things going on up here that I guess I was not totally knowledgeable of, but I thought it was very well written, and it's the opinion of 4 editors in the paper, and probably the reporters that have been covering the issues up here. And I sort of tend to side with this, although I don't want to side. I respect what you voted on, but I'm really not clear what we did vote on. I think some people voted on one thing and other people voted on others. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I think this basically says it all. Try again on the water issue, and it explains why. I've worked for almost 20 years in the health department, Saranac Lake, the district office. I've worked on an awful lot of water systems during that particular time. I went to a lot of town meetings in 3 counties, Essex, Franklin, and Hamilton. And now, for the last 13 plus years, I've worked in Graybrook, and I work in Region 5, which is 8 counties. Clinton, Essex, Franklin, Hamilton, Warren, Washington, Saratoga, and Fulton County. And I also have St. Lawrence County, Lewis County, and Jefferson County. And in all those counties, every place I've worked, including Shazy, and by the way, for the edification, the budgets are very viable still. And we're closing in on the stretch drive of the construction on both the water and the wastewater. They are not $2 or $4 million or whatever was quoted. And I don't know where the erroneous information comes from, but if you really don't want something, I guess you can go to those ends. I feel sorry for the individuals that have problems that now do not have that type of a solution. Will be a little more expensive for them, but one thing we talked about today was non-contiguous systems. And I think these are cruel, but they cost the people that want them more. And I'm going to give you a rational scenario. You have a non-contiguous system, the pipe might go on the other side of the road and the person on the opposite side doesn't want the water. There may be a hydrant within that person's home's vicinity, but if you're not in the district and your house catches on fire, you can't use that hydrant. And, you know, that's a sad way to live in a community, a communal system. I totally don't agree with that analogy, but maybe the way the vote turned out, something like that should happen. And then let the chips fall where they may, because people have set their standard. I don't agree with it, but that's my overview of what happened. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to give a short response to why I think the vote went down. Number one, we asked questions, we never got answers. We asked how many houses were going to be involved. No one could give us a pinpoint of an answer to anything that we ever asked. People were wondering what was going on. They said $3.64 million. This is the first meeting I went to. They said this was going to be a loan. They said it was going to cost you $40 a month to $50 a month. Then at the very end, it was going to be 89 cents a day with $2 million worth of grants. Well, then that makes $4 a month, in my estimation. Am I not right?
No.
No.
Wait, let me explain the finances and where that came from. Because it was obvious that everybody went to the polls, didn't know what they were voting. First off, Rob Swider came to the town board meeting on June 11th, and he is the health department representative who is responsible for public water supplies under what is termed a self-help support system in the health department. He basically indicated that the school's involvement raised the point score from 85 to 200. And the reason for that is because the school has approximately 1,300 staff and students at that facility. That was going to be part of the water system, and it changed the points from what you got on the problems that the two communities had from 85 to 200. Well, being at 200 points, it meant that the project then was eligible for a $2 million grant. And that money comes out with the federal budget every year under the drinking water SRF. And last year, I think they got $14 or $16 million for grants in the state. Well, 200 points would have put this project up to where there was maybe only 6 or 8 ahead of it, and you have to be ready to go to get the money. They'll give it to you maybe a year or two in advance, but what we want to do is we want to go back and get a verification and another hardship letter to verify that. Well, if you subtract 2 million from 3,640,000, and the reason that went to 640 was so that everybody was hooked up. And I don't know if everybody attends the meetings, but that was another town board meeting earlier, and I think it was in April or May that we talked about that. And that was so that the water lines would be hooked up from the pipes in the right away of the highway to the houses, so that there would be no hidden charges to each homeowner. And if you take 1,640,000 and you divide it by 30 years, you get an amount. You divide it by 235. You come up with a magical number of $232.64 a year per user. That happens to equate to the 1990 median household income for this area. It's 1%, $23,226, I think, and some odd cents. Well, anyway, it came out to that amount. That's 1%. That's all they can charge you, the way the formula goes. The other part of the money for the user fee was an estimated cost by the engineer, and we talked about $100 a year, and I said, well, is it possible that it could be more? I think they should be looking at worst case. So they said, well, it'd be no more than $125 a year. So you add $232.64 to $125, you get $357.64 a year. It's less than $1 a day because it's 365 days a year, and that's where the 89.9 cents a day comes from.
That's with the $2 million, right? That's the $2 million in the grant money,
Right.
Which we don't even qualify for
which
yet.
we don't qualify for yet.
Rob said you will qualify, all you have to do is reapply. I didn't go to that meeting. It's basically his program. I'm only up here trying to help the health department because it's very hard for an individual that has the whole state to cover remote areas of the state. And since I used to work for the health department, I said I'm a lot closer and I don't mind doing the work. I really have primacy in wastewater systems. And wastewater systems, believe me, are much harder to sell than water until I got here. And I don't know what's wrong with people in a communal setting here, but
On that note, if we can bring it back, I'm the consultant for the Corps. I just want to wrap up the Corps' presentation on the site. The Water District sort of ties in a little bit because there's TC in the water system, in the aquifer, and the township was talking about putting in a water district. That's why we put it on the agenda, so that me as a consultant to the Corps, the state, we can more fully understand the entire picture here, not just the site and the TCE issue, but how that impacts the community's water system. So that's why we brought that up.
I heard something interesting, and I really trust your science on TCE and what's going on in TCE. But when you said strikes of benzene, and then he came out and said that's a non-carcinogen. I mean, obviously, we're getting it, what levels and what variables we're getting it, and if it's coming from the missile site, but obviously you're getting benzene from the wells, the monitoring wells.
Gasoline, fuel
We
oil.
had benzene in monitoring well for this last time, and we had some benzene, some fuel oil constituent heads, benzene being part of it, and ethylbenzene, and xylene, some basic things that you find in fuel, in a number of residential wells. And the Corps found it when it was sampling, they gave it to us, and we've since investigated and put filters on wells that needed filters, and have drilled new wells and have done soil big soil removal projects and done things in town. It's not coming from the silo.
Okay.
It's coming from spills that have happened throughout town. There's one down by Nephews, there's one down at Agway, there's an old historical one up on Station Hill Road.
Where's monitoring all for?
My well 4 is west side of town, on the north side of the road.
Up on the north side of the road? Okay.
It's on-
Landmark wise, do I know?
It's on your
Oh, okay.
newsletter too.
I'll bring up the map.
Pardon?
It's right there.
And that happens to be right next to one of the big soil removal projects, and where the underground storage tanks were, and where there's gas contamination. So that's not unexpected, other than the fact the well's 100 feet deep. You know, fuel floats, PC sinks. So, you know, but you never tell. These things are volatile, so they move very readily. In 22 parts per billion, yeah, it's there, but, you know, again, we're not getting to the thousands of parts per billion range. We're going to certainly keep an eye on it, and I was talking to Steve earlier about when the Corps gets done with this, what are they going to do with those wells, and DEC, as also being in charge of cleaning up gasoline and fuel oil spills, might want to try to hang on to that well. That was an expensive well to put in, and we'd like to have it if they're not going to use it anymore. You know, that's going to be recorded in the record of decision, and I'm going to talk to the Corps and try to get a deal, because it doesn't make any sense for me to have to do the same thing. You know, so that, you know, 22 part per billion showed up, and it wasn't there before, and we have had some activity there. So I don't know what to tell you.
So as more wells are being drilled, this could actually push it into.
Well, the modern well that was put in was drilled and cased into rock and grouted shut.
Okay.
So that is separated the upper aquifer from what
There
we
was
were.
some similar wells drilled when the ag was still happened, wasn't there?
And when petroleum spills, as a general rule, start looking shallow first, because fuel does flow. So we go to the groundwater surface, or a little bit below the groundwater surface, to pick up the dissolved constituents, try to figure out the plume, the migration of the plume, and if there's any floating product on top of the groundwater surface. So, yeah, there might have been wells installed in the past. It was just like at the Atlas site itself, there's wells installed in the past, but they were shallow wells because we were looking for fuel. And also, it's a lot more expensive to drill in rock, you know, obviously. So, but now we have both, you know, and we have. That's one of the other reasons I wanted to try to get a hold of that well, because we have monitoring wells that are shallow, and it'd be nice to have one close by deep, so we can make a connection between the two.
Any questions?
Yeah, I just have a question for Dr. Major. Doctor, I was wondering, is TCE listed as a carcinogen? Is it a known carcinogen?
EPA has essentially withdrawn all the data on TCE. Because it's such a big problem, they felt what they had out there wasn't right. And they're going to come out with something again. But right now, it's not listed because it's the EPA puts out their data through a data system called IRIS that you can pull up on the computer. And essentially, they've taken all the data out of it, and it could take a while. They're very methodical. You know, they don't do things overnight. But they're going to be a reload. The only thing I'm saying, if you talk to their scientists, if it comes out a carcinogen, it's probably going to come out a threshold carcinogen that has an effect only at pretty high levels.
So we had addressed this before, but long-term, low-level exposure may not be a factor in our what we have existing here over several years?
There's no evidence and no scientific reason to believe TCE is going to build up over time. What you've got here seems to be pretty stable, according to just what I've heard tonight. It doesn't look like that you had 1,000 parts per million, and now it's dropped logarithmically.
We've had
It looks
levels-
like it's pretty much the
We've
same.
had levels over 4, you know.
Yeah. So
Didn't reach the magic number
Yeah.
5, but
the MCLs are very, very protective. Like I said, they not just protect the people, but they protect the most sensitive subgroup of people. You know, if you had some people that are really sensitive to something. If you're under the MCL, yeah, I mean, the MCLs are set as a threshold. You know, they said if you're under here, just don't worry. If you get to be half the MCL, start monitoring to make sure it doesn't jump up. You know, but
stay pretty consistent over.
yeah, and like I said, you're not alone. There's an awful lot of people in this country that are drinking half the MCL, 2/3 of the MCL.
They don't know.
Doesn't
And they
make
don't
it-
know it.
doesn't
90%
make
of
it
the
right, though.
MCL, you know, when they open their public water tank.
It doesn't make it okay, though. I mean.
No, it
but,
doesn't,
You
but
know, that's
it
my
makes it a
philosophy.
well-investigated thing, and we don't see problems.
Thank you.
Other questions?
You talked about filtration. What effect does charcoal filtration have on TCE?
That's carbon filters.
Okay, so charcoal and carbon would be the same, correct?
Right.
They make the in-house filters that are the size of a Pepsi. I used them for 12 years. Will those filter out the TCE in the water?
Is that a carbon filter or is that a salt filter?
No, it is a carbon filter.
It'll do it for
Accurate makes them, pardon?
It'll do it for a little while. If it's activated carbon, it'll remove
Yep.
volatile organics. But
Okay.
again, what else do you have coming in? And is there iron fouling it? Or is there bacteria in your well that's
When I had the system in my house before anything was done by the DEC, I had a pre-filter, just a regular fiber filter, okay? That stopped all the rust and sediment and petroleum. There were times I would change that filter as much as every 2 weeks. The carbon filter, the vacuum pure, I think it's about the same size. I could go 3 months to 6 months, depending. If I missed my pre-filters, then yeah, I would give it a carbon filter. I'd take it out and throw it away. But the DEC, when I had an Instapure carbon filter on the sink, took samples, and the water was excellent coming through that filter on the sink, Instapure. And that's at the same time, kerosene was in the casing. Same identical time. All I had on it was an Instapure. The filters were $3.70. The whole system was $29.
And that, you're correct, it will filter it.
Only drinking water. I mean, the filter I had in the cellar filtered everything. That was the carbon filter this size. At that time, the last time I used them, they were $13. I know there's people in this room that use them. You might go 6 months, you might go a year. Again, depending what's in your water. If you've got real dirty water, you have to put a pre-filter in it to. I've had as many of them as 3 in my house in the cellar. I have 3 canister filters this size.
Right, but what I'm saying is, it will filter it. The question becomes, when is there breakthrough? What's nice about a larger system versus a smaller system is, if you miss a week and you say, I'll leave it for another week, you get a breakthrough during that week. Whereas a larger double system handles a larger volume of water. A smaller one can only handle a certain volume of water before there's breakthrough. It will work.
Yes.
You have to be very diligent. And that's where people fall down. You know? You have to be diligent.
Other than that DEC sample that they took out of your sink, how many other times did you sample out past that carbon filter?
They only took the one.
No, how many times did you sample it though? You said you were running before we took samples. How many times did you sample this?
I never had a sample. I only had a sample.
So how do you know when it was broken through?
That's what I'm asking. I'm asking if it worked.
I don't know. We have to sample it to find out. Like we were talking
That's what
about.
I'm saying. It will filter
Exactly.
for a day, a week, an hour. You know, you have to look at what's coming in. You can you can call up a vendor that sells carbon, and they can do the calculation for you. You tell them, I have this much TCE, my carbon is 2 pounds, a pound, a half a pound. When will I have breakthrough? How much water? They'll say 4,000 gallons. Then you look and you say, how many gallons do I use a day? 100? 40 days I'll have a breakthrough. That's a rough estimate.
When you call them, tell them else you have coming in there too.
Right, I mean,
Well, right, but again, that's why I had to use a pre-filter.
right, but then if you have kerosene, if you have BTEX or gasoline products, that's going to chew up your carbon filter too. That's not going to hit in the pre-filter. That's going to hit your carbon and use up your carbon. So instead of 40 days, it could be 3 days.
I understand that. I'm just asking if it works, and you said yes, it does work.
It does work.
Okay,
The question is time. And if you're not sampling it,
I understand that.
You
But
would
you've got the
use-
same thing as far as time with your big canisters.
No, you don't.
yes, you have time,
Right.
but it's a year, 3 years,
Oh, yeah.
5 years.
Okay.
So at that point, someone like me who forgets to put the trash out on Tuesday, I mean, my wife would be hitting me upside the head every other day to change the filter.
Do you have a backup system with that as well?
Yeah.
A primary and a secondary filter?
Cheaper to buy a bigger
Yes.
filter than go to the
When I had it in my
first
house,
store.
yes, I did.
Other questions? I was just going to jump back to the agenda to see if there's any questions on any particular items. I went through the investigation phase pretty quick because I covered it in depth last time. And I know there was a few new people this time. I didn't know if there was any questions on what we did, the court has done out on site. Any questions related to that?
What do you do with the wells when you're all done?
Gravel up.
What?
Gravel them up. It's like concrete. You concrete them up. It's called gravel. It goes down, it goes into the fractures, and it comes up into the well, and it becomes a solid mass, so water can't get down in it. You pull the casing out, you just come up to the ground, and if you came up to it, it would look like a little manhole, little concrete on top, you know? You don't see anything, it's flush with the ground. And that's why the DEC saying, before you go and you ruin a $10,000 well, or however much it costs you guys, you know, maybe we can take ownership of that
That's
well.
like a deal.
And that's something the board just has to work out.
I know when they came to test our well, to test our water, they were very nice, the young men that came to the house, I want you to know that. But they, the ladies, but they ran the water for about 15 minutes before they did test it. And they did take the filters off, and they did a very, very thorough job. And we spoke to them, I mean, we had 15 minutes with you guys. And they were very knowledgeable about other things that they explained about TCE also, because most of them were geologists.
Yes, Ernie Salazar was probably the one that
Yes.
came the most.
And they were very, very knowledgeable. And
Again, they told us that what we had in our well water was about 1 grain of salt in a 20-foot swimming pool. That's all.
so, you know, just,
Put your mind at ease.
Human and ecological risk, I know I breezed over that. The field is very big and there's lots of technical terms. So when we bring those people back, it's going to be overwhelming. But we'll try to spell out our acronyms, as we like our acronyms. Any question on that, how that's going to proceed? I mean, we're going to take our data set, we're going to crunch it through these models, look at exposure scenarios. Like Dr. Major was saying, we're going to look at, how much do you get exposed, dermal, inhalation, ingestion. We're going to look at those pathways. They'll probably come up here to see what the receptors are, especially the ecological people. They're going to want to look at the site. Dirt floods process. Any questions on where we're going in the dirt floods process? And how, after the feasibility, let me jump to that slide just a If it doesn't show risk, we come down, we go to public notice proposed plan, we go to comment, we have a ROD, record of decision, and then without risk, with acceptable risk, there's always risk. drink a can of diet soda, there's risk with everything, but acceptable risk. And that's going to be defined by the parties. If there's acceptable risk, there's no DOD action indicated. That's when we route the wells and we say, nice meeting you. If there is risk, unacceptable risk that is, that's when we do a feasibility study and we say, hey, do we need to do a remedial action? We come down the same thing, we make a rod, the Corps says, Weston, pump 10 billion gallons and clean up the aquifer, you know? And it takes a tenth of the defense budget to clean up the aquifer up here. That's when we do our remedial design, remedial action, completion reports when it's all over, and then in the end again, no action indicated because everything's addressed. So those are the two ways we're going to go. You can look back, this is in your package. We either go acceptable risk, no action, which would happen maybe another year from now, by the time we put together the risk assessment, get it commented by the state, do our comment period, record of decision, and go and close out, probably be about a year. If we have to go to remediation, who knows?
Again, as a point of clarification, this risk assessment is only going to consider DOD contaminants of concern that are related to the Athens missile silo. It will not take into account your bacterial problems or your petroleum problems. That is not part of this.
Which is Dr. Major indicated. It sounded to me like he would be much more concerned personally, if he was drinking benzene at 1 or 5 ppb versus TCE at 5 ppb. So that, you know, we're not looking at that benzene issue. And maybe if you did plot up cancer, age, and everything else, you might see a cluster unassociated with the TCE, but associated with the petroleum, historical petroleum.
I got a question, just out of point of interest, has the state plotted petroleum plumes?
We have petroleum plumes identified on maps at various stages of investigation. As we find spill, we get working on it, you know. Like, for example, we had the meeting down at school, last time we had Roxanne here, and we talked about the water line. We got, people were standing up and saying different things, and one lady stood up and said, well, my daughter, water smells like fuel. And that was a new one on me, so I went over and took her name down, gave it to her, and maybe we go again. So as we get them, we investigate them. We have not done a holistic Ellenburg people map as of yet that I know of.
I guess to assist the community, I guess in their dilemma about whether this whole water district problem, whatever, and to help Gary as to which direction to proceed in the future. I mean, this is not a core issue, this is a community and a state issue, but it might be beneficial, you know, if the state were to provide a map, you know, plotting out the plumes for the petroleum.
All of our reports, all of the things that our contractors do are certainly available.
You know, and what about the bacterial contamination? You know, the question was, is who is impacted by this? How many households, which households, where is it located? If they had a plot of a plume for the petroleum as well as the bacterial and just overlay those two things and show it to the community, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it might help them to understand their true problem that they have up here and help them to decide, you know, which direction are they going to go in.
Documentation works, and we haven't seen any documentation, any paper documentation on anything. We hear one thing, we hear another thing. First we hear that there's, the first meeting that I went to the school, I specifically asked the man that was standing up there, and I think it was the man from the state, how many wells that were in town that people could not drink their water, that they were not within the limits. And he said 0.
Of what?
Of water that people could not drink. He said 0.
Contaminated of what?
Contaminated water, of anything. Anything.
How many wells are?
What meeting was it though?
That well at the school, the very first well that it was in April, was it? March.
So this year or the year before?
This year.
You were there. You were there.
He said 0. And I said, did you say 0?
That was Rod Swider, yeah.
Yes, he said 0. The next time we went to a meeting, they said they did the testing, which we never saw any documentation. We never saw where they did the testing. They wouldn't have to say anything, but they never gave us any documentation. They said there was E. coli in it and other things in it. But 38. 38, there was 38. But how did they take the testing?
Well,
Did they take the testing by running the water like what they did here?
And they were 90 on the news the night before the vote. So, you know, and you wonder why people don't understand what's happening and what's real and what isn't real.
the people who had tests done on their wells had the results. They're private wells.
But which tests are you referring to? Because I don't know what happened to the back teeth tests that the county collected. I have no idea where they went.
So how would anybody know? We get these numbers that are just in the air and around town.
How do you need a water district? We don't know how many contaminated wells you have.
The night, it was a town board meeting. I can't remember just when it was, right after all the sampling had been done on all the wells for the bacteria. And the Clinton County Health Department was all set to come up to the town board meeting to give the results. And they called from their office to Brent Trombley, and Brent Trombley told them not to come to the meeting. And they were going to deliver all the results in detail to the people who were at the board meeting.
That wasn't 100% participant test, right? It was only a random,
That was
random sample.
100, and some people paid to have it done, so we could have a few more done. The town paid for 100. So they split it up, like 50 at the corners and 50 in the depot, and then there were a few people that threw in the $15 and got theirs done.
But can I ask one other thing? Why didn't the Department of Health give us documentation? Why couldn't we see this
Brent is
in
supposed to
writing?
have the documentation.
We never saw any documentation. Why would Brent do it? Why
You couldn't get answers at any meeting.
No, but I'm saying they were supposed to have sent
See,
these.
no one got documentation of anything.
I think
It's hearsay.
Gee?
The grant became available in January.
Huh?
The grant became available in January to do testing on the wells. The testing wasn't done until April. Why did that happen?
I don't know, but you know, I'm going to tell you what did happen was this was all set up, and it was set up by the state DEC to have this testing done. They were the ones that got the lower rate. Instead of $25, they got $15 if they could get 100 wells sampled. And we went to the town and asked the town if they would do this sampling. And then we were told that the money had to be at the lab before the sample can be done. I called Brent and asked him to take care of this, and it had gone through resolution and all that, and had been appropriated. And he told me that I knew where to get the money, to call Russ Bio. So I called Russ Bio, and Russ had to go up the center and get the check signed and all that, and Brent did not take care of that check and send it to the lab. It was brought back and put on my kitchen table, and I delivered the check, hand-delivered it to the lab so that the testing could proceed. I don't know what to do. We tried to work with the town supervisor all during this, that they would take charge and help with trying to provide more documentation to everybody, so that we knew
But the documentation
where.
should be coming from the experts that are doing the testing and have the knowledge that we have back there.
It's not coming from me.
It's not coming from Brent Trombley.
Well,
No, but the health department.
Excuse me. Everyone's starting to talk at once.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a communication issue between the people that are funding or collecting these samples and the community. I don't know if this is the forum to address that communication problem. I don't know if there's a committee specifically for this water district. I believe there is. If there isn't, it probably needs to be formed, and there needs to be a communication plan. But
That's probably the answer.
that's neither here nor here for this. Near nor here for this project. Wanted to point out one spelling error. I wanted to apologize to Dr. Major. I put an S on this. You can see it's corrected here. In your handouts, it's not. So if you give him a call and all of you say Dr. Majors with an S on it all the time, he's going to blame me for it. So if you could cross out that S, I'd appreciate it.
We were thinking about documentation, and I wanted to bring it up again. I know it's in the newsletter. We're starting a second repository. Joan all the documentation for the course testing on the site is available for the public. This is the second repository. The first one is at the
Town clerk's office.
town clerk's office, okay? So anything you want relevant to our project from the course end is available for the public.
At the library, we're setting that up tomorrow. There's 2 or 3 documents I'm still having copied, so I'll FedEx those up to the librarian probably next week.
Well, I think we have, yeah, we have some other documents too. Can I just make a suggestion? I've facilitated meetings for years, and I've done water work for years. It really would behoove you to get together as a group. It sounds like you have some expertise here and in water, and I think I've seen someone else at another meeting that had some expertise in water, and sit down and try to hash this out as a community. You know, put out, if you can, get together a small group, try to get a newsletter started, ask more questions than you have answers for, and that sounds like where you are. I think in order to be able to sleep at night, you all need to feel satisfied that you made the right decision when you voted. And the right decision comes with having the answers to individual questions. And it's not, you're not going to do this in a week. I come from a utility where decisions on rates sometimes took 2 years, for instance, to decide on what a rate for water would be. And this investigations with regard to pollutants, you know, there are utilities around, and if you go visit one, a big city that has a good record and it's on the web, you're going to find they do tons of testing for tons of different things. But you really need to come together as a community. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It just means you have to sit down at a table and start to think about what you're dealing with here. And one suggestion I had is there are private water companies that would be very interested in solving your problems. And I'm not suggesting that you even have to buy the water from these private water companies, but maybe getting them involved or having them looking at your situation might help you. It might not be the answer for you. You know, I don't know the water companies up here, but at least looking at this more carefully so you don't have an incident where people get sick. Milwaukee, if you want to go to your website, had several thousand, I believe about 3,000 people ill in Milwaukee because of turbidity, and many deaths about 6 years ago. So that was a controlled water system, and they blew it. So I know I'm speaking out of turn and I'm talking more, but
Thank you.
we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There are alternatives.
Yes, I know we keep reverting back to this water district, which is not a core issue, but I guess I'm kind of curious. Is there a repository where they can obtain all the information, such as what the benzene testing is?
DEC is not involved in the sampling of bacteria.
Okay.
We came in as said, you know, you're finding bacteria problems here. This might be a larger issue. We're bringing it up to you. You need to take some action.
So the community is doing the testing for bacteria? So the community should have some sort of a repository or somebody gathering all this information.
Then also starting to have the information, as somebody's already indicated, we've shared that with the town, and we didn't realize it wasn't shared with the people.
Okay.
What we can do is, we have a website, we can get that information on the website if that's the way. If you want an individual copy, comments, we can send it to you. It's not a problem with it. I mean, I really apologize that it didn't get shared. That wasn't the intent at all. There's no point in doing it if it's not shared.
The State Department of Health worked for a long time, sent a fact sheet around to a lot of different people, get consensus before they send it out to a mailing list that we made from Cynthia Self and from our mailing list here to residents in the town of Ellenburg that describe what various problems you're having with your water. That was sent out by the State Health Department. They were trying to do things, trying to do citizen participation, trying to keep people involved. There's been newspaper articles. There's been a lot of things that have been put out there. Now, you know, if you want individual well sample results for individual wells, there again, that was done, you know, that's the county health
And
department.
that's individual, and that can't be shared. We can share the summary. Because that's not, yeah.
Necessarily, they're private wells.
Go back.
I wanted to ask you when your information, the Army Corps of Engineers information became available in our library.
It has not yet. It's been at the town clerk's for the last 2 years at that repository. It came to our light that it would be easier for the public to access at the new library. So we decided with the Corps to say, let's put one there. So tomorrow, Joan and I are going to go there, and we're putting a box of reports there. The copies of the newsletters, the meeting minutes, everything's indexed. There's going to be 35 items in the repository.
And there has always been one that rigor, too.
And as-
The repository as well.
And as we generate more documentation, it will go to the repository. Okay?
Can we ask just one question?
You can ask 50.
How many wells have TCE in this area? Do you have the number?
How many individual wells?
Like individual wells.
Nobody's picking up the test wells. How many
People wells.
It's on 31.
You have, where's my thing over here?
It's the same with the 13.
It varies, it varied by rounds. We did 4 quarters in the homeowner wells. And I would get a number for you because the Corps asked me for that number too. And I don't have it off the top of my head. In the first round, we did 61 homes in the first quarter. 32 wells had TCE. The second one, we did 64. 29 had TCE. The third round, we did 60. 30 had TCE. The fourth,
These are all the same wells.
these are all, no, some of them are different. Because someone would
My
say,
well has been tested every time. My well was tested 7, 8, 9 years ago. And I had TCE then.
They tested the same wells.
There's a
Not
chart.
all the wells had TCE every time. And that was my question to him. I need to know how many had TCE out of all of them.
and
Anytime.
I couldn't answer it off the top. I can go back and query the database and find out. What happened is, a homeowner would say, hey, I got a well up in the barn. It hasn't been tested the last 2 times. Could you test it? And we'd call the Corps and say, they have a well out in the barn. And we'd take a sample and they'd say, fine. So we take a sample that time. The next time we'd go out and go, okay, we're going to sample the barn. No, don't want you to sample the barn. Okay. You know, so a homeowner would say, add this well or subtract. And, you know, we worked with the Corps, but the numbers went up and down each time. So it might have had it that one time we sampled it. And then we didn't sample it again. So approximately half the wells we sampled during each round had TCE. About 30. I can go back and get the number, but I imagine it's going to be 34, 34, it'll probably be, the highest number we have is 32, so I'd say add a couple.
Have those been mapped at all? Or?
That's this map right here. There's a report in the repository called Historical Documentation Review, something along those lines. It's a report and it has this map in it. Not this one, that's the water supply one. There's another one back here. And it's got all the historical results from DEC, Department of Health, whoever took samples that we could find.
And that was the basis to start the Corps'
Right.
sampling. And that's, that map brings back, Steve,
That's the
result
result.
of the Corps' 1 year of sample.
4 rounds. That's what these wells are. You'll see a well coming down to a 4
Was your well
rounds.
sample part of that effort?
Yes.
So your results are up there on that.
Yes. I'm the one right next to test well 7.
So we're up on Cambridge.
Yes.
Are they sure that the TCE is coming from the actual
For a long while, I didn't really know where the
You
original.
want me to put a percentage on it?
Go ahead.
99.
Thank you.
Is it associated with DOD?
98.
I won't guess, but someone probably used solvents there. We know the military did. That's why they're here. There was a late piece of information that Lou sent me. I couldn't get into the copies that you have. The New York State Department of Health sent her information. That was the second item on the action item from last meeting. First one was Dr. Major coming to discuss health. The second one was the Department of Health doing cancer issues. And you can take down that information. If you have any questions, I guess you can call her to talk about cancer issues. I think the community wanted to know what Dr. Major talked about. If we want to look at cancer, and the town attorney, Mr. Phillips, brought this up last time, what questions do we ask? I mean, we go to door, but I don't even know where to begin, you know? How old are you? How long have you lived here? Those, you know, do you have cancer? What types? When did it start? How long is into it? You know, all these different questions that you need to ask, even to start looking at that information. So I believe she might be able to help in that regard. I think that's it for our presentation. I can discuss any of the engineering type work that was done out on site. If you have core policy issues, see Luz or Carol or Marie. I believe Cynthia has...
I just wanted to make one more little statement.
That's fine.
These two things that were mailed out to the people in the respective district, there was one mail, a blue one, that went out with the survey, when the survey was mailed out the end of December. And this was an information from the State Department of Health. I just wanted to make it clear because there was so much stories circulated that we were putting out fact sheets that we were writing them, and we never wrote anything. Any of our information we obtained from the health department. And then they invited us to submit questions. And so we collected, I think we submitted 19 questions to the State Department of Health. And they wrote this booklet and mailed this out just prior to the meeting up at the school. But I just want to make it perfectly clear that none of us who are working on this put out any facts of ours because we don't consider ourselves expert in anything.
Can I, Carol's asked me to try to sum up something about what it is, why we're here, and our suggestions. We were just kind of quickly, and she gave me a little note. We are, as you can see, going to embark on a risk assessment and make a decision whether to move forward in a feasibility study or put a public comment period out and close the job. We are here, the Corps is here because of the TCE, because of that the FSS 11. We recommend that the community find you, the people, find some leadership and get yourselves together from the state, from the health department and from the DCE. Find the plumes for both the petroleum product and for the bacterial products. Get your hands around that and sit down and chew on it. Try to get yourself, if you can, a little newsletter put out so everybody go door to door, hand it out, try to help people understand the stuff. It's not easy if you're not in the field. And that, you know, we really, the Corps feels somewhat out on a limb on this issue because of the complexity of the drinking water issue. And we really want to continue to have the lab meetings here, but we feel that your other issues have to be dealt with, and you have to find some leadership to try to get your arms around that and keep it separate from the TCE. You know, we're going to be around to deal with the TCE. You're certainly welcome to come back. You're welcome to talk to Steve and Carol and Luz, who are here at every meeting or have been here for the last several, and other people have been here before. You know, and we'll be watching. You also have an editorial, and normally in response to a newspaper editorial, there's a nice little circle that can evolve from that. You can certainly write letters to the editor, you can write op-ed pieces, you can continue and investigate reporting. You've got a TV camera here, have meetings, invite them, get them in because people are watching them and they can support you and it'll grow. But we really have to segregate out our piece of this from TCD. Okay?
I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse or anything like that, but we do have 2 town board members here. You know, I haven't heard much of a comment, but will you bring this to our town supervisor and bring the community together and form a water committee made up of these people, made up of the people that are anti the water district, and made up with people that have been associated with wanting good water. And that would bring the continuity, and I think that's what these people are trying to tell us, is we need to bring our community together, we need to have a common goal, and we have to find out what our common goal is. And you as a town official, I'd like to say that you would bring this. You would bring this.
I was speaking with our lawyer this afternoon, and he said that we cannot form, we're not required to form a water district because we do not have enough population.
Yeah, but not
But
water.
that, Charlie, listen, please hear me out. That does not mean that we cannot form a group to give us information, give us guidance, this sort of thing.
Will you chair that?
But I would be glad to.
And I think you should push forward with that.
Also, I was disturbed to hear that there was information came in and we did not know about it. I think that perhaps all of the groups who are involved are a bit at fault, along with the town board, that you have not, in a situation like this, made sure that every town board member got the information. Because we can only make judgments as to what we're knowledgeable about.
Just for clarification, what information are you talking about? Course reports and information?
No, she's talking
Or
about bacterial.
the bacterial information, or all the...
Bringing everything together, I think is something.
Everything together, yes.
So, is the... I guess...
Now, I know that our town clerk is serving as a center for the information. Perhaps it would have been to everyone's advantage if all board members had received this. I mean, this is not a little, shall we cut down 3 trees in that yard and 2 in the next. This is much bigger than that.